Welcome to WCG Talks Trials, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of clinical research, sharing the latest trends, insights, and best practices from experts across the industry. In each episode of WCG Talks Trials, we'll explore a different area of the clinical trial industry, while featuring a diverse range of clinical research and medical professionals. If you're passionate about advancing clinical research, improving patient outcomes, and driving healthcare forward, then WCG Talks Trials is the right podcast for you. We are so glad you could join us today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Sandy Smith, Senior Vice President for Clinical Solutions and Strategic Partnering at WCG, and I am just thrilled to be joined on this episode of WCG Talks Trials by Tiffany Pierce, Director of Clinical Trials Core at Henry Ford Health. Today, we're going to be talking about yet another disruption that's occurring in clinical research. Certainly, we have all survived through a pandemic. We have seen organizations do multiple changes trying to improve their efficiency and effectiveness. And now we have lots of uncertainty about where the future of clinical trials may be in terms of some of the financial disruptions with government funding. But we do know that in all cases, there is an utmost resiliency at sites, and folks really do hunker down to try to get through any of the uncertainty and disruptions that they encounter in the environment. Before we dive in, let me remind you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on your favorite listening platforms like Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify, so you never miss an episode of WCG Talks Trials. Tiffany, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role and background?
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this podcast. I've been at Henry Ford Health System for 27 years now, all in the research arena, doing various roles. So I started as a study coordinator and then moved into negotiating budgets and worked on the financial end of things, and eventually moved into oversee an oncology clinical trials office for a number of years. My current role resides in research administration, where I'm tasked with supporting department-based clinical research teams with resources they need to be successful and compliant with their clinical trials. So we're currently helping with things like IND and IDE submissions, clinicaltrials.gov administration. We provide the system with central resources like our clinical trials management system, Encore and eReg, post-award monitoring, which includes education and training and internal audits, things like that. And then we've centralized our study startup team under this structure, which includes outsourcing our coverage analyses, budgets, contracts, and IRB.
Wow. 20-year veteran in the industry. You have seen roles from the ground up, worked in very complex therapeutic areas like oncology. And I know your organization went through a great deal of centralization, embracing technology. So a lot, given we have just got through a pandemic. So my background too, I've been in the industry for quite a long time. And I will just say I'm coming back from ASCO, and I always get my battery recharge going there, seeing the drive, the enthusiasm, the commitment to bettering lives through all of the research that's being done, that intersection of clinical research and clinical care, and seeing so many of our therapies so much more targeted in this era of precision medicine. So one thing we don't want to see is anything slow down as a result of these either real or perceived disruptions. And I would say as we talk to organizations, we're hearing a number of things. Some are doing a lot of modeling with the what ifs. Others are just being a bit more conservative in their spending. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that clinical trials continue on so we can continue to deliver these awesome treatments to patients and in support of their families. So for us, remaining nimble in this current environment is really the key. So to that end, WCG has a host of services that we're calling research resilience, because what we do is partner with sites like Tiffany's in order to take some of the administrative burden off the site, things that can be done by others who do this day in and day out, have that level of expertise and budgets and contracts alongside our expertise in ethical review, institutional biosafety, and many of the other services that help to keep clinical trials, get them open, as well as bring them to completion as quickly as possible. So coming back to the theme of disruptions and kind of uncertainty, Tiffany, what disruptions are you either currently seeing at your organization or maybe hearing about from some of your peer institutions as a result of the changes at the federal level?
We've been pretty lucky, Sandy. We're not really seeing significant disruptions at our institution quite yet. There have been a few study terminations, however, not at the scale of many other institutions. Although the federal indirect rate cut proposal is currently stopped by court orders, we're still anticipating cuts and have completed some planning exercises to see where we might trim 10 to 15% of our costs if needed. So like you mentioned, we're doing some modeling exercises to just prepare.
So is there any discussions that you're hearing, again, either your institutions or others, about possibly trying to grow their industry trial portfolio as a result of the perceived threat of maybe losing federal funding?
That is definitely a tactic that we're employing at Henry Ford. We've always had a pretty diverse portfolio of studies, but increasing the number of industry-sponsored trials is something that we will be actively pursuing.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on the impact to investigator-initiated trials? Again, some of what we have heard from organizations that have done a lot of them and really supported the investigator interest to pursue those, that perhaps those may be curtailed as a result of some of the belt tightening that's going on financially at institutions.
I think that's right, because these are study opportunities, especially the ones where we partner with industry for maybe just drug supply and the institution is funding the rest of the study. With these anticipated financial cuts, those will no longer be feasible. So I do think there will be a reduction in the number of investigator-initiated clinical trials.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, Tiffany. Any ideas on how we may be able to reconstruct how investigator-initiated trials have been done, other than institutional funding, which we know might be a tough area to receive funds from? Any other thoughts about how partnerships might help us in the future?
I think one tactic would be to design the study with the coverage analysis in mind, ensuring that as much as we can, studies are modeled after standard of care and meet the requirements where we can bill third party for a large portion of the conduct of the study. And then, of course, being nimble and as efficient as you can be with everything else in terms of the conduct of the study would help reduce the financial burden.
Yeah, great point you brought up about coverage analysis. And we do see some organizations actually doing a coverage analysis before their scientific review committee, and it weighs into the decision on the economics related to the study. So I think that's a great thought related to investigator-initiated trials.
Doing it even earlier, Sandy, where you might do a preliminary coverage analysis at the time that the investigator is designing the study. So you work hand in hand. As most investigators, they're so interested in the science of things and they want everything in the basket, right? Not understanding that maybe there's not funding for those extra things. So having them weigh carefully whether they really need the extras or it's just a want is something that can help move things forward.
Excellent. Great thought. So as you look at the trial portfolio at Henry Ford Health, and certainly you all have been committed to a major transformation with centralizing, embracing technology, partnering and outsourcing, how do you see that institutions and sites focusing on study startup might help them with some of these either real or potential financial constraints?
One thing that we're focusing on at Henry Ford to reduce these financial constraints is a robust feasibility review. So taking on a study simply because it's scientifically interesting and potentially beneficial for patients isn't enough anymore. Sadly, we have to ensure that we have an adequate patient population, that the logistical requirements of the study match the resources available, and that the true costs of the study are reflected in the budget. This creates an environment where execution of the study is really efficient, which is what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And another big focus for us has been on our pre-award processes to ensure efficiency and reduced redundancy. So in order to maintain reputational relationships, repeat business from our sponsors, and efficient startup processes, we aim to move from site selection to initiation in less than 90 days. So having clearly defined workflows with decision points for startup processes have helped with this. It includes things like playbooks to help staff execute decisions quickly, development of master contracts, master fee schedules, master consent forms, and in our case, outsourcing to augment our staffing.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. But essentially what I've heard you say is you're picking the right study and you understand the fine-tuned workflows in order to get the execution within a prescribed time frame that you've set. Really, really important. So you get the trials up and running. Have you seen, as a result of that focus on feasibility and startup, have you been able to open more trials as a result?
I would say yes, although that's not our primary focus. So we are able to function really in a more streamlined, lean way that allows us to do more with less. But having more studies isn't our end game. Having the right studies is more important to us.
Well, and the other thing that I often see and have experienced in my past too is physicians find a really, really exciting trial that scientifically has merit. They have potential patients to enroll to the trial, and then they just kind of lose interest over time because it's taken so long. So maybe you could speak a little bit to how your focus on feasibility and workflows and timeframes have impacted your physician engagement.
Sure. So I think you're absolutely right. When studies drag on through the startup process, they do lose interest. They forget about the study. They move on to something else. So the quicker we can execute, the more successful we are on the back end when we get to the enrollment portion of the study.
Great. So let's shift now to trial execution. Is there anything different that you're doing now, either as a result of some of your organizational efforts towards efficiency or related to this current disruption to help you with trial execution?
I don't think we're doing anything different, but like everything else, this boils down to efficiency. In my opinion, you need to ensure you've developed an intentional recruitment plan for trial execution. For example, making sure you have a plan to identify patients prior to opening. This will ensure you hit the ground running. We all know every trial is a little bit different and that plan might look a little bit different for every trial, but having a plan in place is so critical to success. There are a number of artificial intelligence trial matching tech companies that can automate this. This is something that we're looking into at Henry Ford and have been for quite some time. We've vetted a number of these, but still haven't made a decision on what we want to do. It's also equally important to monitor and close studies that aren't enrolling to ensure that unproductive studies aren't demanding your staffing resources.
Excellent point. Which leads us to my next question is, in this environment, one thing we've heard is positions are being scrutinized very carefully. While we have seen some reductions in force, I think what we're hearing more about is caution about adding new resources or even replacing positions that may become vacant. How do you see that sites can optimize their resource allocation?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts here. So a few things that we're focusing on to support resource allocation are education and training of our clinical research staff, ensuring everyone knows their role and knows how to function in a compliant fashion. It really helps when an employee understands what their role in research is, as well as how they interact with other players on the team. This cuts down on the number of quality and compliance concerns that you might have later on in a study and really drives that efficiency. We've, like many sites, deployed a central clinical trials management system. And one of our key focus that helps with resource allocation is driving consistent utilization to promote efficiency, compliance, and oversight. The CTMS reduces variability in our processes and allows for cross coverage. So when we have staff exit quickly, someone else can jump in and pick up very rapidly because we're all using the same system and are familiar with it. It's also been instrumental in oversight to identify where the institution can provide more resources to support trials. Something else we continue to do is evaluate technology that automates coordinator-intensive tasks. I just talked about using AI to match patients to trials. Another avenue we're exploring is automating data entry from EMR to EDC. So anywhere we can automate saves resources. We've contracted with a number of research staffing agencies to be able to augment staffing quickly when needed. Historically, we would use agency staff and kind of go through the same red tape each time. We now have established partnerships with these staffing agencies who understand our pay practices, our benefit models, what our research structure looks like, and what our job descriptions look like, so they can hit the ground running very quickly and provide us with qualified candidates to step in as needed. And then last but very significant impact, we've outsourced our pre-award functions, as you know, Sandy, which allows us to more easily scale our operations up and down. It frees up time of coordinator resources that we maintain so they can focus more on execution and enrollment.
Wow, what a laundry list of potential solutions that sites can take away from this podcast. Thank you for being so granular and sharing it. And I think one that I really want to underscore is your comment about role clarity and knowing how different positions intersect. Obviously, as you work on workflows, you see where those handoffs are, and people know what their job is and how what they do impacts others. So thank you again. I'm going to turn it back maybe to you now, Tiffany. Uncertain times, you're trying to keep everybody moving in a forward direction. You're trying to keep the trials moving forward. You're interacting with sponsors, with members of your team, with others. How do you remain nimble in this environment?
I think being flexible and being able to maybe back up and look at things in ways that we haven't historically looked at them to find new solutions is important. At Henry Ford, we've been more fortunate, as I mentioned, because we've always had a diverse portfolio of trials. One of the things we're really focusing on to remain nimble in the environment is amplifying our non-federal research. So that's one tactic we'll employ. And then, continually planning for budget contraction, even though we're not experiencing it yet. And we're going to continue to look for opportunities to gain efficiency, gain more income, increase volume of trial activity, and increase partnerships, which always streamline and promote efficiency.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I want to bring this to a positive ending. Clearly, you've shared a lot of tactics and ideas that Henry Ford is either thinking about or has implemented. And we thank you for sharing that intelligence. But what successes has your team been able to celebrate thus far?
Two key successes we've celebrated are successfully outsourcing our pre-award functions for pharma-sponsored trials to you all at WCG. This includes coverage analysis, budget negotiations, contract negotiations, and IRB. Our site has a federated research model where departments manage their clinical research fairly independently with few central institutional policies and oversight. So honestly, I was the biggest skeptic that outsourcing could be done in a way that represented our site's unique needs. Surprisingly, this has been done very successfully and has reduced our startup time significantly. In addition, it forced us to do all of those painful exercises I talked about earlier. We had to rethink workflow, driving both consistency and the efficiency needed to employ rapid decision-making. And this has set us up to be agile in the current environment and allows us to easily scale our model as needed. The other success that's related to this is we've reduced our startup time significantly by over 50% in the last 2 years. This has really helped us maintain the reputational relationships with sponsors that we desire, ensuring repeat business and allowing us to execute more rapidly so we have a greater enrollment period and can be more successful with enrollment and execution of the study.
Amazing metrics that you just shared. And it's interesting that you called yourself a skeptic because, as a leader, you are obviously moving innovation forward for your organization and realizing that success. So again, any final comments before we wrap up, Tiffany?
No, thank you. I've really enjoyed talking with you today, Sandy.
Well, as always, we appreciate our partnership with Henry Ford Health. I want to thank you, Tiffany, for joining me today and sharing so many details that I think folks can walk away and think about, implement, and are really tailored to be nimble in this current healthcare environment. So we appreciate everybody joining us today for this episode of WCG Talks Trials. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you have any questions or you'd like any information about how WCG can support your research, please visit WCGclinical.com. We hope you found this episode insightful and you'll join us for future episodes of WCG Talks Trials. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of WCG Talks Trials. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred listening platform as we continue to explore different areas of the clinical research industry. As always, we encourage you to join in the conversation. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics you'd like to hear on the show by visiting us at wcgclinical.com/podcast. We're here to serve as a trusted resource as we work to improve lives and accelerate clinical research together.